Well, it's the subject of the adjournment debate in the House later on this afternoon, and leading it is Pippa Heylings, who's the Lib Dem MP for South Cambridgeshire. Pippa, welcome to our coverage. Good morning to you.
Good morning, and thanks very much for helping raise this issue nationally, like I'm trying to do.
Well, what is your point about SEND provision? What have you discovered in your work?
Well, what I've discovered is that this is top of my inbox, and I found out that it's top of many other MPs' inboxes as well, because we're hearing from more and more families and carers about their distressing situation. There is a national crisis in the provision of special educational needs support, and this is failing our children and young people. It's failing families and carers. It's failing the professionals and staff and teachers that are there. And in the end, this could be a time bomb as well for productivity and social care and NHS going forwards.
You compare best practice with worst practice, and why do you think there is the difference?
So I've been invited out to schools, and I can just say how inspiring it is to see, for example, in South Cambridgeshire, at Bassingbourne Primary School, Melbourne, Foulmere, the ones I've been talking to, and seeing in practice what they're doing with such limited resources to support the children and young people that are in our schools at the moment, in mainstream schools. And it's just amazing to see what they are able to do to support children, to manage their behaviour and enable them to integrate as much as possible. But I have to say, they are all showing me that this is a cliff edge. So when I talk to, as you say, families, parents, they write to their MPs as their last port of call, really, in desperation. And what we've got are families waiting not just months, but we've got them waiting years for a diagnosis. We have not only a crisis in funding of local authorities to provide this support, but also a national crisis in the availability of educational psychologists to be able to do the diagnosis. And the answer to all of this, everyone says to me, is early diagnosis so that we can support young people from a very early age.
Now, there is, I think I'm right in saying, quite a dramatic increase in the proportion of youngsters who are presenting with issues in this area who need SEND. So it might be ADHD, it might be autistic spectrum type diagnoses, or a blend of the two. Do we know why there should be a rise in that? Is it that we are perhaps misdiagnosing or mislabelling youngsters as autistic because it seems to be, I don't know, fashionable?
So the data that I've received and have, of course, been exploring as I try to understand how this is a national issue as well as one in my constituency in South Cambridgeshire, is that in the last 5 years in Cambridgeshire, there is a 270% increase in children with autism. And there is a 50% increase overall in children who are receiving these diagnoses.
That's so extraordinary. 270%. That's madness. What is going on?
So what's happened is it's the awareness on the one hand. So it became a statutory provision to support children who had never been supported before, never been recognised as having these issues. So it was recognised as statutory provision for local authorities back about just over a decade ago. And so then it's been about how you can actually diagnose and support those children. But because we've had over now, nearly 10 years of chronic underinvestment, despite recognising the scale of the problem, because there hasn't been the support provided, either through the funding or through the provision of the educational psychologists, occupational therapists, it means that we are now seeing the reality of this, that the families and schools are picking up the pieces of this broken system.
Have you heard, and do you believe the evidence, that one of the impacts of the VAT on private schools measure that is going to kick in for real in January, when parents will be getting those increased bills for the first time, is that many more schools are going to find it uneconomic, or they're going to be unable to continue, and many of those will be providing for SEND children. So that makes this provision, or the nurturing of SEND children, even more of a challenge, doesn't it?
You know, as you'll know, so our Liberal Democrat position on this is that we shouldn't be putting VAT on any type of education. What you're signaling there is just further evidence of the crisis in the situation and how young people are being failed across the board. You know, COVID has also played a part in this. And as we're seeing now, the sort of the impacts of what's happened with children with special needs during lockdown is now becoming more and more evident, I think, to schools, both public and private, across the land. What we need to do now is to raise this nationally, to make sure that the government is finally properly looking at early intervention, early diagnosis, investing to save and support all those who are struggling in this system now.
Well, thank you very much indeed for spending a few minutes with us. Pippa Heylings has the adjournment debate in the House of Commons later on this afternoon.